The African Union has reached a critical milestone in its fight against gender-based violence. At a just concluded AU Mid-Year Summit in Malabo, 6 countries officially signed the African Union Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. And this is a groundbreaking legal instrument that seeks to comprehensively prevent, prohibit, and eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls across the continent. So the convention, which was adopted earlier this year during the 38th ordinary session of the AU, is more than symbolic. It's legally binding once ratified and covers violence in both public and private spaces, including cyberspace, during peace and conflict, disaster, as well as recovery, with strong provisions on justice, survivor support, and preventative education. It's seen as a major step towards a more gender-equal Africa. And to help us unpack this achievement and what it means going forward, I spoke to Honorable Janet Ramatoulie Sallah-Njie, who's the African Union's Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, as well as a Commissioner at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I began by asking, what is the status of women and girls' rights on the continent at this time?
My capacity as the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, it is my responsibility to monitor the promotion and the protection of women's rights within the continent as a whole. And within the continent, as we speak, as you have rightly indicated, it's not a matter of one country. It's a continent-wide issues. Challenges that we have presently confronted with relate to the issue of violence against women, which is a systemic and endemic issue throughout the continent. And I must say globally also, because it's not only in Africa that we experience violence against women, but it's a challenge that we have in the continent. And it was because of that that the African Union, actually in its wisdom, the heads of state decided to adopt a dedicated instrument to combat the menace of violence against women within the continent and to address the challenges that we are confronted with. Within that context also, when we talk about violence against women, we have emerging issues dealing with digital violence against women. Femicide is on the rise. We also have the cultural practices that inhibit women's full participation in society, female genital mutilation, child marriage, forced marriages, early marriages, a vast array of challenges that we're confronted within the continent. But having said that, it's not all gloom and doom. We have pockets, it's a mixed bag. We have pockets of successes here and there because we've been fighting for women's leadership for a very long time. And we are seeing women now taking the leadership mantle. We celebrated recently Namibia for the historic election of the Honorable Excellency as the President of Namibia, and her bold steps in ensuring that her actually reflects the country in terms of men and women with gender balance, ensuring that the parliament at the highest level, within the judiciary, we have parity. So this is something that we celebrate. But while we celebrate, we want to have a critical mass because it's not enough that out of a continent of 55, we're talking about one. We would like to see more women in leadership. And this is why we continue our advocacy, our campaign, within the context of the very revolutionary instrument that we had adopted before the AU Convention, which is a Maputo Protocol, which is a very innovative, revolutionary instrument that calls for the full ensuring that women are fully incorporated in development processes, ensuring that we prohibit all forms of discrimination against women, we prohibit all forms of violence against women. So in brief, this is just the situation of women within the continent as we speak, as at the moment.
So how significant then is the signing of this Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls at the AU Mid-Year Summit?
The AU Mid-Year Summit was held in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. And as you may be aware, the convention itself was adopted in February during the 38th ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of States in Addis Ababa. And since its adoption in February, we've had now 6 signatures. The first signatory was Djibouti, that took place in Addis Ababa. But on the margins of the Mid-Year Summit in Malabo, through advocacy And through the resolve of my mechanism as the Special Report on the Rights of Women and the AU Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, and concerted effort of women's rights organization, we were able to actually get 5 more signatories on the margins of the summit, which is quite actually significant. We would have loved to have more, but we're happy that we're able to actually generate 5 signatories. These signatures are very significant because by signing the convention, states are signaling their commitment and willingness to be bound by it. They're not bound by it, but when you sign a convention, actually, you are actually saying to the whole world, to the continent, that you will not take any steps that will contradict the convention. But we will move it, we'd like to move it to ratification because the instrument itself actually spells out how it enters into force, and it requires 50 ratification. So the 6 signatories that we have right now is a step in the right direction, and we will not relent. We're continuing our advocacy, and we're looking forward to having, at least before the celebration of the 1st anniversary of the adoption of the convention, we'd like to make sure it enters into force, at least as a minimum, with 15 ratifications. So the signatures are quite very significant, and we're encouraged by the signatures by these countries on the margins of the media summit.
Can you briefly explain how this convention differs from other frameworks and declarations before on gender-based violence across Africa?
Very interesting question. I think it may be significant to reiterate from the onset that the convention does not stand on its own. The convention builds on existing declarations that are there of global interest to women's rights. It's a CEDAW Convention, which is the International Bill of Rights for Women globally. And then, as I mentioned initially, we have the Maputo Protocol, the convention, which is actually the Bill of Rights for women within the continent. The Maputo Protocol, as has been lauded globally as one of the most revolutionary, transformative, and innovative instruments when it comes to women's rights. In these very relevant articles, it prohibits violence against women in all its forms, in general terms, and specifically also talks about specific issues related to child marriage. And for the very first time, we have an instrument recognizing female genital mutilation as a form of violence against women, which is quite very revolutionary. We don't have that in any other instrument. So what the convention does is that it provides us with the first legally binding framework with robust provisions dealing with prevention, dealing with protection, and punitive measures when violence against women occurs in any context. So it's a force specifically binding instrument, specifically dedicated to addressing the issue of violence against women and builds on existing frameworks. So this is a very welcome initiative, and we actually congratulate the heads of state who, in their wisdom, found it fitting and necessary to address this thing that is of global concern and of particular concern to Africa as a continent, because violence against women is one of the most persistent and devastating human rights violations in Africa across the continent. Whether it's in peacetime, as we say, when there's no conflict, during conflict, we know what happens. Women's bodies are being used as part of the battleground, and this is a challenge. Women are being subject to rape, sexual slavery, and actually violence against women is being used as tactics of war nowadays. So this is a matter of global and actually continent-wide interest. And we're really very happy that this framework actually is specifically dedicated. So as I indicated, it's not the only one. And when we actually review the framework, we've reviewed within the context of the existing legal instruments that we have. So this is what actually makes it very unique. Also, it actually deals with emerging forms of violence against women, digital violence against women, violence in the cyberspace. I mean, we could have actually done that under the aegis of the Maputo Protocol, but it specifically mentions, just like Maputo Protocol for the very first time mentioned FGM, here we have a dedicated instrument that talks about violence in the cyberspace. It talks about femicides, which is a rising concern in the continent. So specifically deals with that and provides the general principles, the guidelines, state responsibility. What will states need to put in place to curb the menace of violence against women? What are the principles that should guide states when actually they deal with issues related to violence against women in terms of prevention, protection, and also the survivor-centered approach that actually it builds into in a legally binding framework. These are things that at the level of the African Commission, we've elaborated on in our soft laws, in our jurisprudence, by having general comments and guidelines. But this time around, we have a legally binding instrument that actually obligates states to uphold these principles as they deal with the issue of violence against women and girls in the continent.
I think you've pretty much given me some a bit of an answer in terms of my next question, because you did mention it. There are some quite comprehensive and unique highlights in some of the provisions that are in this document. And I wonder if you could take us through that. I mean, you've mentioned cyberspace as one of them. And again, that's something that's fairly modern and probably not well understood as violence.
Yeah, I think the issue of digital violence or technology facilitated violence is an emerging issue. But even though it's an emerging issue, I think it is well known the challenges that women face in the digital sphere. Women politicians are subjected to harassment and intimidation. Girls and young women are also subjected to harassment and intimidation. I mean, violence that takes place offline is now manifesting itself at an exacerbated state online. And the digital space actually offers sort of a barrier and emboldens people who are actually perpetrators, even worse than when the violence that occurs offline. So this is quite a challenge. And it is really very heartening that this is an area that is actually extensively covered in the convention. At the level of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which has been given the mandate to monitor the implementation and accountability mechanism for the convention, we've actually recognized the issue of violence against women. And we had actually adopted a resolution to study the dynamics of violence against women within the continent and to offer a comprehensive study that will actually offer guidelines to the states as to how to address this menace. So what we have in the convention actually builds on what we had already focused our attention on. And we're hoping that once that study is fully realized, with consultations and participation by the continent, member states, civil society organizations, and all relevant stakeholders, it will actually reinforce the commitments that are enshrined in the convention relating to violence against women in the digital space. So this is an area of great concern for us as the mechanism of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa.
It speaks quite a bit to a victim-centered approach and the need for positive masculinity. I am curious, though, how do these principles translate into practical, enforceable actions by member states?
Yes, having a survivor-centered approach is very crucial to address the issue of violence against women, because women who experience violence are confronted with so many challenges. So as we work towards punitive measures, we must also look into the status and the mental health and the status of women who are subjected to violence. So the survivor-centered approach actually ensures a very comprehensive and integrated approach to solving the problem of violence against women, looking at the root causes, finding the ways and means of ensuring that women who are victims and survivors of violence are able to be well integrated back into their societies, that accepted back into their society, and not being ostracized. The challenge we have within the continent is that despite the fact that violence against women, as the president of South Africa said, has reached pandemic level, we find that the culture of silence that we have within the continent, our socio-cultural context does not allow women to speak out. So having a survivor-centered approach will embolden women, will ensure that they can speak out and claim their right without any backlash, being compared with any backlash, without being ostracized in their society, ensuring that their mental health and psychosocial support is offered to them. This is very important, and this is why the convention expressly provides for institutions, structures, laws, and facilities that need to be put in place to ensure that survivors actually, their needs are actually well addressed and taken care of. So this is very central to at least addressing the issue of prevention, addressing the issue of protection, addressing the issue of reintegration back into society. I think this is very central to the issue of violence against women within the continent, and the convention speaks to those issues. I think that's very important. On the issue of positive masculinity, recognizes the fact that in society we have both men and women, boys and girls. And the work we do, we cannot do in isolation. We cannot keep talking to ourselves as women because the perpetrators are men and boys. So how do we ensure that we actually use those voices, those spaces, to ensure that together, as a collective responsibility, we're able to work to address the menace of violence against women? How do we ensure that we're able to use champions by whatever name, whether you want to call it positive masculinity, a he for she, or well-intentioned, well-meaning men and boys, to use them as agents of change as we work towards addressing this menace of violence against women. Some of the incidences of violence against women are deeply embedded in entering social-cultural norms, entering patriarchal norms. So for us to be able to work together, the multi-sectoral approach also is very important, bringing on board all stakeholders, men, women, boys, and girls, religious leaders, traditional change agents. Everyone has a role to play as we work to address this really deeply entrenched problem we have within the continent. So the principles that we've adopted are reiterated in the convention are principles that we've been using for a very long time, but now we've incorporated them into a legally binding instrument. And we actually calling on states to ensure that as we address the menace of violence against women using the convention in real life, we actually embrace these principles in carrying out the work. And as the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, my mandate is to ensure that all these principles that are enshrined in the convention do not just remain laudable principles on paper, though they reflect the lived realities and they are actually utilized in fighting the menace. Mm-hmm.
So six signatures so far. So there's quite a journey in terms of getting the whole continent to sign up. And you've already explained that the next step would be ratification. I wonder, once that happens, how will the AU and your office ensure implementation, compliance, and accountability? I mean, will there be mechanisms to monitor and report violations, for example?
Yes, yes, 6 signatures. So I would like to celebrate those countries that have already signed. We have Djibouti, that was the first country that signed the convention. Then we have the Gambia being the second country. We have Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Angola. We have Liberia, and these countries are like role models for the rest of the continent, and we want them to inspire other countries to also sign. As I indicated at the very beginning, we require 15 ratification, but signing the convention is a very good commitment, and actually it encourages member states to ensure that they move on to the next step of ratification. And once we have the 15 ratification, the convention enters into force and becomes an obligation on those countries that have ratified to ensure that they implement its provision, domesticates its provisions, and actually that women and girls within those settings, within those national settings, are able to use the convention to claim their rights before the domestic courts. So it will require not only signing and ratifying, but ensuring that the legal framework at the national setting incorporates the provisions of the convention effectively. Glad to say that some of the countries already have very good legal frameworks, but it will actually call upon those countries to now review those frameworks to ensure full compliance with the provisions of the convention. As the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, which is one of the mechanisms of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, our sole responsibility is to help member states to ensure compliance with legal instruments related to women and girls. And we've been doing this, and we have the experience of the Maputo Protocol, where we've been successful in having 45 ratification, and so many countries now have reviewed their legal framework to incorporate the provisions of the Maputo Protocol. So what we need to do is to carry on and build on that work to ensure, and this is what we will do as a human rights mechanism, in and all stakeholders, civil society, national human rights institutions. Because the issue of human rights is not just the responsibility of one mechanism. It's a collective responsibility. We all have a role to play. And I think the media also has a responsibility, those of you who come from the media, to also popularize and also incentivize compliance, to show we raise awareness. So we all have a role to play. And this is a role that actively is a call to action. The call to action is for member states to accelerate ratification so that we have the 15 ratification. We should ensure that the convention enters into force. We also call on member states and we'll work with them consistently to look at their legal framework, to make recommendations for review of the legal framework. We will go in country for promotion missions. This is a strategy that we want to have to ensure ratification. And once ratification happens, we also have our guidelines for reporting, because the African Commission has been entrusted with responsibility for monitoring the implementation as the accountability mechanism. So under the guise of the African Commission, which is the African Charter, that on the right, states have an obligation to report to the Commission on steps they're taking, legal, policy, institutional, to ensure implementation. So this is something that we will do constructively and consistently. When states actually prepare their state reports, we will actually interrogate and engage in constructive dialogue with them and ensure that the convention is actually implemented. Where there are shortfalls, we will make specific recommendations to states, which we will follow up with promotion missions, helping them raise awareness with training and ensuring that states are able to fully implement the provisions of the convention. Of course, I must highlight the fact that one of the biggest challenges we have within the continent is that we have the best legal frameworks. We have the African Charter, we have the Maputo Protocol, and today we have the convention. But the biggest challenge we have is the issue of implementation at the national level. So we highlight this challenge and we flag this challenge, and we're going to work to overcome this challenge. So the AU, which is the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate, together with the AU Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, the Mechanism of Social Rapporteur on the Rights of Women, civil society organizations, we've always collaborated so that member states actually adhere to the principles enshrined in all these legal instruments. And we're going to continue in that area, and we will not relent until we reach the desired state.
That was Honorable Janet Ramatoulie Sallah-Njie, the African Union's Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, as well as Commissioner at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights.